Fantasy War Room time here on Peacock and Williamson. We're looking at the tight end position in 2022. Matt Williamson was still busy on vacation. He couldn't get away. He couldn't get his mind away from football. So he was ranking fantasy tight ends, as he tweeted out, while he had his toes in the sand. Let's talk fantasy tight ends, maybe hash it out. Maybe I'll argue with Matt a little bit about his initial rankings for 2022 fantasy tight ends. Coming up right now.
You're listening to the Peacock and Williamson NFL Show, your daily podcast on the National Football League, powered by the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome to the Peacock and Williamson NFL Show. Brian Peacock and Matt Williamson with you at BD Peacock at Williamson NFL. We are talking fantasy tight ends today. Thanks for making Peacock and Williamson your first listen here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode brought to you by Blue Nile. Make your moment sparkle with jewelry from BlueNile.com. And Locked On listeners get $50 off purchases of $500 or more. This podcast exclusive includes engagement. Use promo code Locked On at checkout. Okay, Matt, I want to make sure that you weren't too many tequilas in when you were making this list, because you did change a couple things even already since we had
slight tweaks
to talk about this stuff. And it's an interesting list because there's been some fantasy stalwarts at the tight end position. And Matt, it's looking like you think that the top of the tight end market as far as fantasy football goes is going to get shaken up here in 2022.
I do. And I was on vacation, and of course I'm still reading stuff and browsing the web, and a lot of downtime, even though the toes in the sand, drink in the hand, and I've read something about Kelsey's going to be the number one tight end again, and yeah, that's easy, and I respect him to no end, and the production rate that he is on. We had a conversation a couple days ago about Gronk being the best tight end ever, true or false. I mean, I think it's a conversation, is Kelsey the best Chiefs tight end ever? Because, Gronk's number one competition was Gonzalez. Nobody's more productive than Kelsey over this stretch. So by no means is this a knock on Kelsey, but I put Kyle Pitts number one. When I was reading that article, I'm like, yeah, that's easy. Kelsey's one, sure. Chalk, great. But if I'm picking a tight end, am I really going to pass on Pitts? And this is some of my dynasty background, kicking in here, because in an unbelievable rookie class with guys like Jamar Chase and Najee Harris for fantasy, is a really, studly type guy coming out as a rookie. Pitts was a top 3 or 4 pick in those rookie drafts, over Waddle and guys like that. And I think he's done nothing to disappoint. He's clearly the dynasty number one tight end. That's not what we're talking about here. And really a first-round dynasty pick. And I think it comes down to this for me, is I think he's the freakiest pass catcher on the planet. Yeah, I think his tools, talent are just remarkable. And I don't know that the average fan, no offense if you're an average fan, nothing wrong with that, understood how good he was as a rookie. And maybe his fantasy production wasn't through the roof because he didn't catch many touchdowns. We know touchdowns are fluky, and people will say, I'm not taking a Falcons receiver with my first pick here. I get that. I don't have a lot to combat that, except watching his tape, he's more like Calvin Johnson than he is, than Gronkowski. He is a receiving freak. And I wish I could cite where this came from. No, here it is. It's from Pro Football Focus. Conor Mcquiston put this out. And he put a graph of every receiver and tight end, how productive they were against press man coverage. And if I took anything away from my year of scouting, and I think it's more true now than ever, receivers versus press man is an unbelievable tell if they're good or not, if they're going to make it. And again, my scouting days, first day of being hired by the Browns, sit down with the receiver and the corner coach saying, watch every snap you possibly can of press man coverage. You're not going to get many at the college level. That's the number one determining factor. And I've really believed that ever since. So getting back to this chart that I mentioned, not strangely, but impressively, A.J. Brown is far and away the best pass catcher in the league versus press man coverage last year. Wow. I mean, I didn't know he'd be number one. Justin Jefferson was also elite. Not shocking there. Superstar. Kyle Pitts was next. I mean, ahead of Cooper Kupp and DeAndre Hopkins and DK Metcalf and Devontae Adams and Jamar Chase. Elite wide receivers. This, quote, tight end is better than all those guys versus press man coverage. And the tape shows it. I mean, this is just a tape-based thing. And again, I'm not knocking Kelsey. I just raved about him. But what's he, 33, 34? And Kelsey's number 2, of course. But I think the loss of Tyreek Hill hurts Kelsey in that prime Hill, but really anytime Tyreek Hill, was scarier to defenses than Kelsey. I believe that to be true. I think they're both elite wide receivers and tight ends for the last 5 years or whatever. But I just think Kelsey is destined to get much more attention than he's ever gotten from coverage schemes.
Yeah, Kelsey going into his age, he'll turn 33 in October. So
okay, yeah.
But there's
tight ends last. I get that, but
right, and they last a little longer. There's a little savvy to the tight end position that you might not fall off like some other positions because, and clearly, Travis Kelce is not because he's outrunning people like Kyle Pitts has, or even like someone like George Kittle had when he had his massive 1,300-yard season a couple of years ago, and
exactly.
Catching short passes and taking them. It's like, wow, these guys got speed too. And Travis Kelce's not necessarily winning that way. And it's interesting that you say, and look, I don't have a problem with Kyle Pitts at number 1. I would put him number 2, still behind Travis Kelce. Just because I know what I'm getting with Travis Kelce. And at some point with the stock raising for Kyle Pitts and maybe Travis Kelce taking a step down, I'll buy that argument, and I don't have a problem at all. I think it's really close 1-2 between those two guys. And you're right, man. Kyle Pitts only had 1 touchdown catch last year.
Right. He's going to catch at least 5.
Yeah. And but fantasy points per game because of that. And even he had top 5 tight end targets. He had 110 targets last year, only caught 68 of them. Right. But he had 15
more than that this year.
But he had 15 yards per catch. So, those numbers, and he was a 1,000-yard receiver as a rookie. So
and we know rookie tight ends don't do anything, and he did.
And he's gonna accidentally catch a couple more touchdowns, right? And with his profile, you would think it'd be actually a superb receiver in the red zone, right? So that could go. Kyle Pitts could go nuts and 1,500 yards and 10 touchdowns, right? Like that could absolutely happen. So I don't have a problem with anybody drafting Kyle Pitts number 1. But one thing you said, which is interesting, you think that Tyreek Hill leaving hurts Kelsey's production, that maybe he'll see more coverage in his direction. Whereas I think most people look at that and say, oh, well, now he's such the clear number 1 that he's going to have 150 targets this year.
Yeah, and those things are always hard to judge. We're going to talk Raiders with Adams and, like some of these things. And Waller, of course, will be on this list soon. But my hunch is the Chiefs' offseason plan is sort of let's spread this thing around. We had 2 unbelievable weapons for a very long time, but I think we'd rather have 5 B- weapons than 2 A+ weapons. And I also think they are destined to run the ball a slightly higher percentage of the time. They have a very good offensive line now. And I'm just thinking of it from a defensive coordinator's perspective. I mean, if it's week 1, I have no tape of Juju and Sky Moore and all those guys in a Chiefs uniform. I'm putting Derwin James on Kelsey and bracketing him with a linebacker and letting all the new guys beat me. He still might get more targets. I can't believe they'll be as quality of targets. And if he slows down just a smidge, it's going to be a little that much harder for him.
And with most of these tight ends, we see that year 2, year 3 breakout. And if Kyle Pitts was already 1,000-yard guy as a rookie, but I do worry about his quarterback. He did have a much better quarterback situation last year. But again, there's not a lot of competitions for targets for Kyle Pitts either in that offense, and they should be throwing from behind quite a bit. So, and I do think he's clearly going to have more touchdowns than he did last year, and more and a bigger share of the offense. So, how is he not going to, be more productive? And he was almost as productive as Kelsey last year. So, I'll buy that argument. And when I'm looking at the ADPs for tight ends here, and of course, we're going to spend a lot more time on a lot of other tight ends, and we're completely skipping over some other guys that deserve, a little conversation that wouldn't shock anybody if they were the number 1 tight end this year. But it sounds like you and I are both on board with Kelsey and Pitts 1 and 2 in some order, and I'll buy that Pitts is going to be the guy. But this is why Kyle Pitts will be on all my teams, and Travis Kelce probably won't be on any, is that Kyle Pitts is going third right now as the third drafted tight end in most leagues, and he's going 15 spots later. So I can get him a full round plus later than Travis Kelce. I'm talking early round 3 instead of late round 1. Then
no brainer.
All about Kyle Pitts at that ADP, no doubt.
100%. And again, I could make an argument to Kelsey over Pitts. It's not a slam dunk. I am just so bought in on this guy as a player. I mean, he lines up outside the numbers and runs slants against the best corners in the league and dominates them. He runs deep routes. I mean, they're going to use him even more. I mean, I'll never forget there was about a 3 or 4 year stretch there during my ESPN days that I was one of the voters at the Fantasy Summit. When the consensus ESPN ranks, if they still do it the same way, it's Matthew Berry, it's Tristan Cockcroft, those type of dudes that have been there forever. And 11 of us got a vote for the final rankings that come out on ESPN.com. And it was Eric Ebron's rookie year. And remember him, he was a top 10 pick, and everyone loved him coming out. Not to the Pitts level.
Kyle Pitts of his day.
Right, exactly. And there's this huge fight in the war room. We got to put Ebron in the top 5. I mean, he's a phenomenal talent. And then all the stat guys, and I remember Christopher Harris standing on the table like, no rookie tight end does anything. Show me some sort of proof that a rookie tight end does anything. Pitts is better than all of them. I just believe that. I think he's the exception to the rule. He's one of the best receivers in the league. I don't care what position he plays, and he's the freakiest.
Yep. And going into year 2, so the sky is the limit for Kyle Pitts. Absolutely. So there it is. Kyle Pitts is going to be 1 here in our 2022 fantasy football rankings, and the warm, comfortable blanket that is Travis Kelce. If you get him, he plug and play. You know what you're going to get. Great quarterback, everything, target share. You got to love having Travis Kelce on your team as well. But we've got him at tight end 2. Some other big names here. Let's complete the top 5 and get down all the way to almost number 20. I think you've got him ranked out for 19 tight ends right now. So that's at least as many. And maybe we'll add some more names to the list as we move on in our fantasy war room for tight ends in 2022. But how about our friends at rockauto.com? With the ever increasing numbers of makes and models, pretty much impossible for your local chain store to carry all the parts you need in stock. So why endure all the, seemingly pointless and intimidating questioning sometime when you're trying to find the right part for your car when they only have one thing in stock anyway, and it's probably back ordered, right? So choosing the only brand in their warehouse happens to carry, you have a computer in your pocket with access to rockauto.com, which is a massive selection. And when I say massive, go to rockauto.com right now. Just look at your car and look at all the parts and options you have right in your pocket or at your desktop computer at home at rockauto.com. And why choose to spend the 30, 50, even 100% markup for the same parts from a chain store or a car dealership? And even more than that, you're going to spend 5 times more when you realize how easy it is to change some of these parts, which I found out recently when I was changing a fender flare on my car, that a cone got up in there and knocked it out. And I thought there's going to be a $500 plus job at the dealership taking my car in. I went to rockauto.com, found the part for $40. It had the rivets. I was able to pop it in there myself. I was blown away, and I'm not a car guy at all. Rock Auto's a family business, been serving do-it-yourselfers for over 20 years. Rock Auto prices are always reliably low for every customer, do-it-yourselfers and professionals alike. So go to rockauto.com right now. See all the parts available for your car or truck, big parts, small parts, whatever it is you need. New carpet for the interior, right? Locked On in the How Did You Hear About Us box. So Rock Auto knows we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need at rockauto.com. Thanks again, everybody, for making Peacock and Williamson your first listen every day. For your second listen, make sure you're checking out everything going on the Locked On NFL channel, which is the home of Peacock and Williamson on YouTube. We just had a big everyone going live for the NBA draft last night, and you can go find all of the latest on all of the draftees for your favorite NBA teams, Major League Baseball going on all year long. We've got all of your teams covered right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Okay, Matt. We've got Pitts and Kelsey as tight ends 1 and 2, but neither of them was tight end 1 last year. That was right. Mark Andrews of the Baltimore Ravens. We've got George Kittle. We've got
Darren Waller's in the
Darren Waller, right?
Yeah.
I think that's the clear top 5 fantasy tight ends right now going into the year. So 3, 4, 5. let's hash those out. The tight end one from last year, Mark Andrews, and that was without a full season of Lamar Jackson. They lost their former number one wide receiver too. So there's a lot of opportunity for that target share between Rashad Bateman, who we talked about recently. But Mark Andrews kind of gets forgotten in that offense, and he was the guy that led all tight ends last year.
Yeah, and big picture, those five you mentioned, including Waller and Kittle, those are the ones you're going to have to pay up for. Those are the ones that most weeks you'll have an advantage over the team you're playing in fantasy. You almost, I don't want to say even extra starter, but in a way you kind of do, and they're going to be pricey. Great respect for Mark Andrews, unbelievably productive last year, has a great synergy with Lamar, and fits that offense to a T, absolutely valuable player. I also think he had a little bit of unsustainable efficiency. I'm not sure he's going to put up the fantasy points per target that he did before. Some of it's scheme, some of it's just, I think he's a very good player, not an elite player. I think Kelsey and Kittle are better football players than him. Pitts is a much better receiver than him. And I'm not giving him a hard time. He's great. He's just not elite. I also think, going back to scheme, I think the second that the ball is snapped in week one, you're going to see corners on islands against receivers and a ton of bodies in the middle of the field against the Ravens versus the run and pass. And it's just going to be really crowded.
And I think just the fit in the offense and how often he's utilized, and he had 9 touchdown catches last year. He's utilized in the red zone a lot. That could kind of, the touchdown thing for tight ends always goes up and down. And you get a guy that all of a sudden has that year where he has 15 touchdowns. Like, oh man, right. Or you have Kyle Pitts last year who had 1 touchdown, which seems ridiculous because he's 6'4" and can leap and should be awesome in the red zone, right? But there's some players like George Kittle who's not been as utilized in the red zone, not as good as he's not that. He's more of an on-the-ground, run-after-catch tight end, which is a little bit rare with his style versus, the basketball player, go up and rebound the ball sort of a tight end that most tight ends are in the NFL. So I do think the touchdown thing is something for George Kittle. He's just not quite the touch. And there will be some years, I'm sure, that, and maybe it's this year, he has, double-digit touchdowns. But he's not as big in the red zone as some other tight ends are. And so that holds him down. Injuries holds him down. I think you're right. Talent wise, I'd have Kittle up here. I'd have Waller up here, but I think you got to put Mark Andrews because of his ability in the red zone and because his fit in the offense and how many targets you're sure he's going to get. Whereas the other guys, the ball might get spread around a little bit more. And there's a brand new wide receiver in town taking some targets away from Darren Waller. So the way you have them listed 3, 4, 5 is exactly the way I would have them listed after Pitts and Kelsey. It would be Mark Andrews 3, Kittle 4, and Waller 5. But those are clearly the top 5 guys.
Okay. A couple little nuggets on those. I talked a lot about Andrews. Throughout his career, though, he has not been an every snap player. I mean, last year was a little higher than usual, but he usually plays like 2/3 of the snaps. He's like a 65% snap guy. And they drafted 2 tight ends. So maybe he's going to have a slight downtick in time, snaps on the field. Kittle, go ahead.
I was just going to say, and when you look at the ADPs too, which when you filter how we like these guys and you rank them out, Kyle Pitts is the guy that's going to be on all of my teams, right? Mark Andrews is not going to be on any of my teams because I don't think what he did last year is necessarily sustainable, and there's more arguments for him to be less productive than more productive than that, which is why I wouldn't want to draft him at his tight end 2 cost, essentially.
Agreed. Football only, not fantasy. I think George Kittle's the best tight end in the league still, and that's going to be all around for a lot of the reasons I talked about in the Gronkowski conversation, the blocking, the mismatches he causes, the after the catch, the attitude, all those things. And there's just not enough spike games anymore, but he might be number 1 on this list by next year. I adore him. I love him. I wish he was a Steeler. I mean, all those things. But the injury stuff hurts him a little bit in this conversation. Hopefully gets put past him. We never talk about it again after this year. Quick question for you, though. I think he worries me a little bit where the top 3 don't, that maybe he's the 3rd option in the passing game. And I don't know if the passing volume is going to be very high for the Niners. So just the math of it worries me a little, versus Ayuk and Samuel.
Yeah. And I talked about the red zone stuff, and I think Trey Lance is going to take red zone opportunities away from everybty and score some of his own touchdowns on the ground. But he's definitely the 49ers offense isn't going to be as concentrated into the middle of the field, into the intermediate range. And so I do think the ball has an opportunity to get spread out. And we saw at times last year, just Trey Lance kind of turning down that really quick slant, first read, not sure about it, waits, buys time, finds something else that ends up being even better, but
Sure,
that doesn't bode as well for George Kittle getting funneled the ball as much. I do think they will target him quite a bit. He would be I think there's a clear number two. It's Debo and Kittle. And I think everyone else is pretty far back. So he's definitely top 2 target share still for the 49ers, but with the injuries and stuff, and you talked about how Mark Andrews takes some, isn't out there all the time. Kittle's out there all the time, and he gets hurt because of it, because he's like a bell cow tight end, basically, and he's physical, and he's blocking his butt off every play where you're not even seeing him in the stat sheet and catching passes. So talent-wise, I'm with you with George Kittle in a similar mold of the old Gronk, but there's just some questions about what the offense is going to look like. But we're looking at ADPs. He's 40, Waller's 43, and that's probably the area I'm trying to draft the tight end if I want to go big at tight end, because I want one of those top 5 guys. Because my next question to you, Matt, is how big is the drop-off after the top 5?
Yeah, it is big. One little nugget on Waller. I love the player too. Mismatch galore. Great football player. Defensive coordinators hate him. But I'm going to be a little below ADP on Waller and especially Devontae Adams for one simple reason. Renfrow is great. I am so hooked on Renfrow. And I'm sure Josh McDaniels sees all those Patriot slot receivers in Renfrow and says, that's the guy that's going to get a bazillion targets. And I look at Waller and think he's probably 3rd on the pecking order in Oakland in terms of targets, where Kittle's 2, Andrews is 1, Kelsey's 1, Pitts is 1. So that's the delineation there. Big gap between Waller and then the next 2. And these next 2, I don't know who to pick between Goddard and Hawkinson. I think they're almost the same.
I
wish the Eagles threw the ball more.
Yeah, I wish there was more clarity with those. You've been a really big Hawkinson guy.
I am.
I know it was hard for you to probably not put him at number 6. But I'm wondering when it's going to happen if it hasn't happened yet, as far as him being just a big volume guy. So for that reason, I might lean Goddard ahead of Hawkinson at 6 and 7. But you're right. There's a lot of questions behind those guys. But there's even a couple names maybe I would say could sneak into that group as well. But just between Goddard and Hawkinson, who you have 6 and 7, I think that's got to be the order. Goddard first, Hawkinson second. Unless maybe this is finally the year. But it just doesn't seem like, last year would have been the year with such a dearth of targets, right? Of players to be targeted in that offense, and a perfect time to just filter your entire offense through Hawkinson. If it hasn't happened yet, I just don't think he's ever going to be that guy. So I might even wait if I'm drafting tight ends and just, cross my fingers on someone later, even though
take 2 or 3 of them.
Right. Yeah.
I'm not fighting you on that. But we did kind of preface the show, and I like to keep on this track with this position. History really shows, Pitts aside, age 27 is when these guys hit their peak, and a lot of these Goddard, Hawkinson age guys are getting in that neighborhood. So one of them is going to break out in a big way and be a tier 1 dude. Of these 3rd, 4th year guys we're talking about. I wish I just saw more splash plays to this point from Hawkinson. It's a lot of nice play, gets 2 yards after the catch, 2 people hit him, he falls down. I wish I saw more dynamic plays from Hawkinson at this point.
Right. Yeah. On paper, his athleticism seems like it's better than what it has been on the field, and his playmaking ability. Although if you take his 12 games from last year and you add those 5 games back, I mean, he's 100 targets and he's probably, closer to 800 yards instead of 500 yards, a couple of more touchdowns. So not a bad season, but not a league winner necessarily as well. So you're kind of getting what you pay for, and probably, unless he has some outlandish season, it just doesn't like a lot possible. More. Yeah.
Gronk would have slipped in right here. I didn't put
him in. I was going to ask you that.
Yeah.
I brought that up. Yeah. So if Gronk unretires and Tom Brady gives him a call the last day of training camp and he comes back, you're going to put him in at number 8, or you're going to put him in ahead of those 2 guys and put him at number 6?
Probably 8. Just don't know that he'll play a ton of snaps. They ask him to block a lot because he's awesome at it. I understand that banking on touchdowns is very up and down and extremely hard to predict. I think that's not true for him. That Brady's going to throw him the ball in the end zone all the time.
Some guys, they have the talent,
Yeah.
And especially with the Brady Gronk connection, that's something that they're at least going to try. Maybe the numbers will be skewed a little bit one way or the other, but there's the opportunity for that to be huge.
Mm-hmm.
Next, we've got to get through the rest of these. We'll go rapid fire between numbers
Okay.
8 and 19 here, 20 if you count Gronk as number 8. And one player that I think should be up in a tier a little bit higher in your rankings originally.
I bet I know who that is because I got a lot of tweets that didn't like
it.
Okay. I have a hunch who you're going with here.
The folks are with me on this one.
There were two guys I got a lot of heat for.
You might have needed on the beach, Matt, to have a Built Bar to help that help that mind to realize how much more talented one of these players is that is not quite on your top 10 list here, or your top 8 list. How about the new flavor from Built Bar? Brownie Chunk Built Bar. Coconut brownie chunk. What are we talking here? Coconut brownies. Okay. Chunks of coconut brownies in the marshmallow puff bar. That is a lot of delicious, chewy, marshmallowy goodness covered in 100% real chocolate, like a fluffy cloud of coconut brownie. But how about this? It's good for you. Low calorie, low sugar, high protein, and all delicious, just like all of the Built Bars are, whether you're doing the marshmallowy puffs or just the classic Built Bars. I like the classic Built Bars even more, and always fantastic new flavors coming all the time. Seasonal flavors at built.com, along with those classic, fantastic flavors of Built Bar. All Built Bars are made with collagen protein, which your body absorbs more efficiently and provides tons of health benefits. Eat something that tastes good and is good for you. It's like a protein bar that practically tastes like a candy bar, so you really feel like you're getting a treat when you reach for a Built Bar instead of one of those snacks with empty calories and you get 300 calories. You don't feel any better about it. Get those 17 grams of protein in your body at only 130, 150 calories that Built Bar offers. And all you got to do is go to built.com and you can get 15% off a box with our promo code. Built.com, promo code LOCKED15 to get 15% off your order. Again, that is promo code LOCKED15 at built.com. Matt, next up, you have a guy that I don't believe in at all, and that in the last couple of years, and I think in the rest of my fantasy football playing career, I will not have David Njoku. Despite how much money he's being paid, he will not be on my roster. I was all about Njoku a few years ago, and he just has never become that guy. And I am looking at a guy you have 2 spots behind him in Dalton Schultz.
Yep.
And that is just downright disrespectful. So you've got 8, 9, 10 here. Njoku, Irv Smith, and Dalton Schultz. I think Schultz should be up in the Goddard Hawkinson category, and I'd probably put Schultz at number 6 with his fantasy points per game. And Amari Cooper's not in town anymore.
Yeah, and yes, that's how Twitter thought as well. You're way too low on Schultz. There's a lot of Cowboys fans out there. Tremendous season. I respect what he did. Maybe I don't respect what he did because in terms of talent, I think he's like an Austin Hooper like talent. He doesn't have the pedigree. Maybe I'm holding that against him too much. And I'm not trying to make waves. Of the 20 guys that I had listed on here, I think he might be the least talented. I don't think he's going to sneak up on anybody this year. I don't think Cooper being gone helps him. I think he was single coverages versus linebackers galore in the past, and now that's not going to happen as much. And I don't want to go this far, but I think he's Robert Tunyan from 2 years ago.
Robert Tunyan, by the way, I saw him sprinting by the way, Tight End University is going on right now, Matt. So the timing of this is perfect. Down in Nashville, George Kittle puts this thing together, and a bunch of these tight ends are there. Robert Tunyan there, recovering from an ACL. He was running. I don't know how much of the workouts and stuff he's doing there at Tight End University, but that is going on now currently, which is perfect timing on our part and not planned.
Right.
But yeah, Tanyan could make a comeback this year, which is nice, and he might be a nice little player to steal in your fantasy football leagues because I don't know how high he's going to go, and I don't know how those targets are going to get spread around. And clearly, Aaron Rodgers in the past had no problem targeting Robert Tunyan quite a bit in that offense. So going back to where we're at with Dalton Schultz, he's just one of those players, and that's what happens at tight end. You can't really put a finger on it. And similarly,
he gets open.
And that's all that. And Dak trusts him, and Mike McCarthy calls plays that gets him open. And I think with someone like CeeDee Lamb, who's really good in that slot role, who's going to play outside probably more, I think that might even open things up more for Dalton Schultz. Not that he's going to get targeted more than the 104 times he did last year, but look, that's all you need. 100 targets, half dozen touchdowns. You're golden with Dalton Schultz at his ADP. And
gets open and catches the football. That's important.
Right.
You know? Yeah. Sometimes that's
he's not a game breaker either. Yeah. And his yards per reception is on the low end of all. In fact, he's lower than everybody we've talked about so far right at 10 yards per reception.
Mm-hmm. That's what I think he is. I think he's a little bit of a pedestrian athlete compared to these guys. And Njoku, quick note, I think money talks, and they gave him a ton of money. I don't see a number 2 receiver in Cleveland. He has been a tease since the beginning, and I love the Njoku, OJ Howard, Ingram that year. They were all first-round picks. None has lived up to it. But I'm banking on the age 27 thing, the Browns giving him good money. I wish Watson was his quarterback. I bet he won't be. Yeah. But he has flashed. At least last year, his highlight tape was wow. But he might just be a tease.
Although sometimes tight ends, the quarterback thing might be a little overrated in some ways. Brissett, you might want.
Right.
He might
conservative
more than Watson would, who's a lot better getting the ball down the field.
Right. As opposed to extending plays and chucking it deep. Maybe I'll hit Njoku in the middle of the field for 8 yards and move the chains, you know.
Njoku's just such a tight athlete. He's never the tight ends need to be loose, you know, that basketball athleticism. And Njoku, while he's a physical freak, he's not loose. And so I would say he's a poor man's version of what we saw with Vernon Davis. Remember how tight Vernon Davis was, but he was 4'3".
Right. Yeah.
This guy's ridiculous, gets down the seam. And then later in his career, I think that probably hurt Vernon Davis. But Njoku's just, you know, even tighter and not quite as athletic, a little bit more long-legged. It just takes him a long time to get out of his breaks. He's not going to, you know, win those quick routes. So I'm all the way out on Njoku. Schultz should be in your top 8 for sure. Irv Smith in there at number 9. I would argue with some other guys, even in this group, just sort of betting on what they could be over what.
A lot of intriguing guys here.
Yeah, and these are all kind of in the same tier. So I think, Matt, you're probably open to some of these arguments, but Dawson Knox, you have 11, Freiermuth 12, Cole Kmet 13, even Gesicki at 14 too. And you could probably go down below with Ebron and Fant and even maybe Ingram, who's in the same boat sort of as Njoku, as a disappointing former very high draft pick.
Right.
I could argue probably a lot of those guys over Njoku. So how did you separate 8 through 15?
Well, this is more of a dynasty thing about me, but I think people realize I do have an affinity for the hot young tight end. You know, I mean, and these guys are not quite as young and as hot as they used to be, but I still think that there's a lot of ability in that whole tier. I got a lot of heat that Gesicki was too low too, but how many targets are there to go around? I mean, are Waddle and Tyreek both going to get over 100? And I just don't know that Gesicki's going to be featured as much as you would like. Kmet's the opposite for me in that I think I'm higher on him than most, and I think he's a good talent, not great. He was first tight end drafted in his class, but they have no one else to throw the football to. So I think this is a potential breakout year for Kmet.
Yeah, can we pause on Kmet? Because
he's interesting.
Because he's just he's a solid athlete, but he doesn't wow me. So I don't know if the upside's there. And I just don't think Justin Fields is the type of quarterback that wants to target his tight end all that much. And I think he might
drive the ball down the field.
Have to because of what he's got to throw to in Chicago this year. But that one worries me a little bit in Kmet. And I don't have.
I might be wrong on him.
You know, very late as a Aaron Owens or a waiver wire pickup just to see what happens there. But I don't know if I'm drafting Kmet and hoping he's going to be anything for me. So being close to, and you have him in tight end 2 territory, but even being that close at number 13 to tight end 1 territory, that one worries me a little bit. I'd probably have Kmet down the list a little bit behind, even maybe behind Fant, behind Ebron, behind Freiermuth, Knox, and I would have Schultz a little higher. I think those are 2 that I disagree with you, and Njoku, obviously, that we talked about. Those are some of the ones I disagree with you the most about. But I want to hear more about Freiermuth. What do you think is going on with Freiermuth here this year?
I think he's a tremendous young player. I actually interviewed him 2 weeks ago. I was on the beach last week, and impressive, you know, as you would think. Hard worker. Everyone in the facility loves him. Good touchdown guy. I just think that there's not a ton of targets. I mean, Najee's going to get targeted a ton. Their top 3 receivers are all get targeted a ton. he's going to get his share, but it's not going to – he might be the 5th leading receiver when it's all said and done. Like, love him. You know, I just think he's better for real life than fantasy, but I like the player quite a bit.
To update you guys, we've kind of bounced around with some of these rankings here. So these were the Williamson rankings. Njoku 8 after that gap from the top 7. And then Goddard and Hawkinson were sort of 6 and 7 in a gap behind the top 5 guys. So 8 Njoku, 9 Irv Smith, 10 Dalton Schultz, Dawson Knox 11, Freiermuth 12, Cole Kmet 13, Mike Gesicki 14, Ebron 15, Noah Fant 16, Ingram 17, Zach Ertz 18, and Everett 19. What do you think about any of these rookie tight ends, by the way? And if you're drafting, Matt, I sort of talked about how maybe I would target around pick 40 if you can get into that, into one of those top 5 tight ends, or maybe you're drafting Pitts. I don't know if I would go Kelsey or Andrews at their ADP in the first couple of rounds. But after that, I mean, who are you targeting? Because who's the guy that could really help out your team? Because I think some of the high end is capped with some of these guys, which is why maybe I would, Schultz, I like it if he was there as tight end 10, or Dawson Knox at tight end 11. Maybe there's a little bit more there. Freiermuth, I'm not sure if the volume is going to be there, but Gesicki with, the offense coming over from San Francisco, and we've seen how often they targeted their tight ends there. Maybe there's something more with Gesicki, so I kind of like him, which is why I'd have him a little bit higher, but I just don't know which one of these players I'm targeting late to think, oh, that's the tight end I'm targeting this year, which is why this is one of those seasons where I'm okay with maybe spending a little bit on tight end.
I'm leaning that way too. And I had a lot more fantasy research to do. And frankly, 12 through 18 could get shuffled up here a little bit as well. The more you look at it, you change your lists. And, Alberto intrigues me. I think he is potentially a breakout guy, and that's maybe why Fant was shipped out. Or Seattle really likes Fant, so they wanted to bring him in and use him. They could look at that 2 ways, or both could be true. Alberto also really does a nice job versus man coverage, which at the beginning of the show I stressed. I think he could be a breakout, if we're just looking for breakouts. The one name I would throw out, first of all, I don't like any of the rookies this year. I don't think any of them are fantasy relevant. But I got a lot of heat for Schultz at 10 and Ertz at 18. I mean, I think a lot of people look at Ertz like he should be in that 10, 11, 12 neighborhood. And he did really well with the Cardinals. But I don't think – you and I did mock drafts, NFL mock drafts, not fantasy. And we looked at the Cardinals and thought they could use an edge rusher, a corner, a defensive tackle, any offensive lineman, blah, 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 all the way down the list, even a running back. Their first pick was a tight end. Like – yeah. I thought that was a little telling. Like, maybe Zach ain't what he used to be, and the Eagles gave up on him quick, and he's not old, and he's a fadeaway slow guy and probably will still be productive, but I don't know what's left there.
And by the way, Albert O, I've been butchering his name this whole time, and
I just avoid it.
I've got Ebron on my brain, so Albert O is probably the right way to go about it. Equibunum, I believe is how you say it.
Oh, I think you nailed it there.
Something like that. It's one of those. I think it's the last one. And maybe I got it right the last time, so I'm not going to try it again. Albert O, but yeah. Maybe some upside there. And so maybe that's the play this year, getting in fantasy draft terms, maybe a free tight end that could be a tight end for you. Yeah. You
mentioned the loose athletes. Like Fant, I was way higher on Hawkinson than Fant coming out of school, same school, first round picks, because I thought Fant was kind of stiff but fast. I think Alberto is a little looser, smoother, but also fast. So, we'll see. Side note, I meant to say before, your boy Vernon Davis, I watched his high school tape when I was at Pitt. Wow. I mean, holy smoke.
Freak among freaks, that guy.
Oh, man, yeah.
Unbelievable. The stuff he did at the tight end, at the combine for a tight end is like, wait a second, 4.3, I was like 4.37 at 250 and lifting the whole gym, like just the strength. It's like, what is going on with this guy? Just different. I can't imagine some of those guys in high school. That's just
it's unbelievable. Stud kick returner. Because that is like all you need to know.
The 240-pound kick returner.
Yeah, exactly.
Good
Stud kick returner. Yeah.
Have fun with that. All right, cool. So that is the early version of the 2022 tight end rankings. If you don't like them, find Matt on Twitter at Williamson NFL. And I'm sure some Dallas Cowboys fans will not like where Schultz is ranked by Matt Williamson, but that's okay. That just means
all right, bring it on.
People are drafting like Williamson, maybe you get a little bonus there. You get a little boost by drafting the player that they let slip through their fingers. A lot of fun. The tight end position is really interesting this year. And how high can Kyle Pitts go? That's going to be fun to watch this year. Speaking of dynasty football, I have Kyle Pitts in the Locked On Dynasty Football League. I'm pretty excited about that one. And I only drafted him because someone poached on our expansion draft last year, poached Kittle off of my roster. And I feel like I'm better off for it. So I'm better at tight end. I'm not better who I would have drafted in that spot instead. But yeah, feeling good about that in my dynasty league. Okay, good stuff. Thanks everybody for making Peacock and Williamson your first listen. Back next week. Make sure you're all subscribed up to the Locked On NFL channel on YouTube to find us there, and check out all the other great content we're doing here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Talk to you then right here, Peacock and Williamson.